And I've been in a couple of groups, meetings. I was in a board meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I was in another group, and then I was actually even talking to my friend as I was driving out here this morning. I was talking to a friend back in Minnesota, and the conversations, the questions were about how we're taking care of ourselves in these really anxious times. Tuesday, for those who may not be aware, is election day in the United States. It's a big deal. There's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of fear. Talking about emotions, there's a lot of those. I had a friend, I saw a post, a friend of mine posted yesterday. She said, next week has been exhausting. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. And so there's the election, there's the ongoing violence in the world, all over the world. There's the dehumanization of people so easily. We see it all the time, othering. And then that's on a societal level. And then there's our own experiences that we're having deaths and losses and illnesses and job losses or births of babies. I had a friend who had a baby yesterday, such joy, so much. So there's all these things happening. So how are we holding it? Climate, we're seeing that. Y'all have been experiencing that this summer. It's like, it's everywhere. And so it can be really overwhelming. It can be really overwhelming. The Buddha talked about it, dukkha. The first noble truth, there is dukkha. He said, this is the noble truth of dukkha. Dukkha, which is often can translate it as suffering, but it can mean discontent, unsatisfactoriness, not happy with the way things are. Birth is dukkha, aging is dukkha, death is dukkha. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair are dukkha. Association with the unbeloved, the things we don't like, dukkha. Separation from what we love is dukkha. Not getting what is wanted is dukkha. There's dukkha. It exists. And so there's no getting around it. We suffer when we try and push away dukkha, when we can't acknowledge the reality of the moment. It's like, no, I don't want this. It's like, you may not want it, but how can you be with the reality of what is actually right here, right now? And when we struggle with it, the discomfort is exacerbated. It almost makes it worse when we're fighting reality, because reality is reality. I always say no one wins a fist fight with reality, because it's there. I don't want it to be this way. I've told this story 100,000 times, but I'll tell it again because it's such a beautiful example. When I was a kid, I was kind of a nanny, and I was taking care of these two children, and the girl was about 8 or 9, and she wanted a salami sandwich. It was Saturday night. She's like, I want a salami sandwich. And I'm like, we don't have any salami. And she just went into this tantrum, the lying on the ground and the kicking and the screaming and la 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 la. And I'm like, there's no salami. But that's the reality of our existence. I don't want it to be this way. I don't want to be sick. I don't want you to this. I don't want to blah, 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 blah. So the Buddha says there is dukkha. How do we take care of ourselves? When we acknowledge the dukkha that exists, because it does exist, how do we take care of ourselves? That's the important part. I was in a class a couple of weeks ago, and the instructor was kind of talking about this, and she said, life be lifing. Life is just happening. Life is lifing. And how do we work with that? And practice that we're doing, mindfulness practice, is extremely important, because we're invited. The invitation of the Buddha is to see dukkha, and meditation practice is to become comfortable or aware of that dukkha, aware of our craving for it to be different, because that's the second noble truth.
We don't want it to be this way. I want pleasant. I want it to be good all the time. I want what I want when I want it. Maybe we don't couch it that way. But when we start recognizing the discomfort we're feeling, it's like, what's causing this? It's like, oh, I don't like what's going on. But I know we work to change what's going on, but how do we work with the experience of the moment, the reality of what's right here? That's the invitation, you know. Practice is an important way to help us deal. It's like, hey, right now it's like this. I got it right here on my arm. Right now it's like this. And sometimes people can use practice as a spiritual bypass. If you know that term, it's using spiritual practice as a way to avoid feeling things. It's like, I always think about, people think of metta, the loving kindness practice, as magic pixie dust. If I throw enough loving kindness at it, it'll go away. And what's wrong? It's not working. Or, you know, the concepts in Buddhism of impermanence and not self. People use that. I've seen that a lot. If something ends and like, well, everything's impermanent. And it's like, are you not feeling this loss? It's a way to push away. You know, we beat it up with spiritual principles. And that's not what this is about. It's about using spiritual principles in this practice to help us be present. To be present. But sometimes we need other tools as well. And I was introduced a few years ago, I think back in 2020, 2021, there's a wonderful teacher, Larry Ward. I don't know if some of you may know him. He is, he studied with Thich Nhat Hanh, and then he taught also with Thich Nhat Hanh. He's really wonderful. And he and his wife, Peggy Rowe Ward, teach a lot online these last several years. And he has a class called The Earth Gate. It's a recorded class. And I took it, and he talked about resourcing ourselves. How do we resource ourselves? And when I was in this board meeting a couple of weeks ago, we have a little breakout at the beginning of the meeting where we talk to each other like twos and threes, because we do it on Zoom, and there's not the chance to chit chat as there is when you're in person. And the question was, how are you taking care of yourself right now? Because that's been the question of the day. And when we were talking in our little breakout group, it was being with people who nourish us, being in community, and being with people who we can nourish. You know, that interconnectedness. There's so much isolation these days. There's so much disconnection, that to really be with those folks we can count on is really important. Not that we're discussing heavy things, but people who care about us and who we care about. And then there's this author whom I love, Austin Channing Brown, and she sent out a note with an article that Monica Lewinsky wrote, and the title of it is 25 Ways to Calm the F Down Between Now and November 5th. And some of them were play games, knit, what did she say? Watch TV, get offline, stop doom scrolling, you know, which is like sitting in front of the TV and watching the news all the time, or going on your phone and reading all the stuff. Stop doing that. Listen to podcasts, read a book, dance, do something, write postcards, you know, make phone calls, but stop, you know, making that the whole focus, especially if you're really concerned. I love baseball, and my girlfriend took me to game 1 of the World Series. I know my team lost. I know, thank you. My team lost the whole World Series, but that's okay. My very favorite performer in the whole wide world was in concert in Los Angeles this week. So I went 3 nights in a row to see him. David Gilmour, from Pink Floyd. So I'm doing those kinds of things, and people are doing that. So how are you taking care of yourself? Because I think sometimes we think we have to always be focused, but we can't.
We can't be on something 100% of the time. How do you take care of you? Sit and pet a cat, go for a walk in the woods, go out to dinner with friends. We have to resource ourselves. It's so important. And I'm taking this next piece from Larry Ward. I went back and I pulled out my notes from 4 years ago when I took his class, and he said, resourcing provides a way to interact with the nervous system to bring it back into the present. Because when we're in overwhelm, we're not in the present. We're somewhere else. We're in the future. Next week is so exhausting. That's not here. That's not right now. So it helps to support our nervous system, which is really important. He says we have external resourcing, people, places, hobbies, even in memory, we can we awaken the capacity to regulate. So remembering things we did that were lovely, I know we talk about being in the present, but intentionally reflecting on the past, intentionally reflecting on the future is not bad or forbidden. We have an awareness that that's what we're doing. We're not lost, cluelessly lost. So we'll spend some time, oh, remember when we did that? Wasn't that fun? And be present with the experiences that might be arising. Oh, that was great. It's like sometimes smelling something. Oh, that perfume or that meal, that reminds me of what X, Y, or Z. And the joy that that brings, that's really important. It's not cheating. Sometimes we think there's so much horrible stuff going on in the world. How can I be happy? Which is nonsense. We have to be present for what's right here. It doesn't mean we diminish the reality of the stuff going on in the world, but we're present for ourselves. We can't donate ourselves to, just being martyrs. It serves nobody. That's why you see a lot of people who are working in service industries and in nonprofits and things, they get burnt out. And we have to learn to take care of ourselves, whatever that looks like. I had some stuff going on and I wasn't able to get out. I love to hike. And I was able to get out like a week or two ago for the first time in over a month. And it was like, oh, forgotten, even though everything's brown and stuff, but there was still on a dirt trail in the trees. And it was like, oh, saw some coyotes and we waved at each other. And it was like, oh my gosh, I'd forgotten how nourishing this is. Calming the nervous system. Calming the nervous system, so important. He said even imaginary stuff like myths and songs, art, cultivating positive archetypes. We cultivate the negative ones so much. To cultivate the positive ones is really, really, really beneficial. And he says, when we practice resourcing, we build internal strength and confidence in ourselves to take care of ourselves. It restores, recreates, or invents new neural pathways in the brain and neurons in the brain and neuroplastic parts of the body. And when they communicate, they form cell assemblies and resourcing becomes a habit of the body. It's like neurons that fire together, wire together. And I talk about Rick Hansen a lot, who I love. He's a neuropsychologist, he's an evolutionary neuropsychologist, is how he describes himself. But he writes about the brain. He has a book called Buddha's Brain. He's also a wonderful teacher, Buddhist teacher. And he talks about bringing in the good, and it doesn't take a lot. It's like if you're walking and you see the sunrise or the sunset and it's beautiful, or you see a flower, or you see something, a baby playing or something that is like, wow, that's really neat. Stop and spend time with it. 15, 20 seconds. It's not a lot, but we don't often give that much time to things. And allow that experience to be receive that experience. Spend time with it. With the mind, with the body. That actually has a beneficial impact on the nervous system, and it becomes part of how you walk through the world. It's really, really important. And they had a resource exercise, I guess, as part of this class. I didn't have the question, but I wrote down my resources, and it was cats, trees, and this guy I happened to see in concert this week, and this was a list from 4 years ago, and his music really brings a tremendous amount of joy to me. So it's like, oh, I should remember to listen to him more often. You know, so if we have to, I invite you to find those things that serve you well. The mind has a negative bias, and it's, you know, based on our reptilian brain, fight, flight, or freeze. We always have to be looking out for the danger, but we don't, for the most part, have to live that way anymore. So to cultivate the positive bias rather than the negative bias, to shift how we view the world, instead of going, oh, that was wrong, that was loud. It's like, oh, what's beneficial? What's helpful? You know, what brings joy and awe? So you have to find your own resourcing. And what came up in a couple of conversations I've had over the last couple of weeks is a lot of us already do this, but we don't label it as resourcing. We have our go-tos. You know, so whatever you call it, take time to recognize what serves you. It's not cheating. I always thought that's cheating. It's terrible right now. I need to be with the horror of it all, instead of going, oh, maybe I need to take a step back. Maybe I need to, you know, watch a murder mystery, or, you know, take a walk, or play with my cats, or do something. That's really important. And then I was thinking also about this week, the importance of the practice. I mentioned metta, the practice of loving kindness, but that's also a resource. If you're familiar with the practice of loving kindness, compassion, the heart practices, this invitation to offer loving kindness to ourselves, just as we offer it to other people, the invitation is to also offer it to ourselves. May I be happy. May I be at ease. May I be free from fear. May I be free. One of the hardest things I've ever done, this practice of loving kindness, wanting good for ourselves, it can be really challenging. You hear a lot of people, because we live in a world that says we're not good enough. And if you did a little bit better, you could still go, yeah, you did all right, but you know, you could do a little bit more. That was good, but instead go, no. And I'm reading this book, it's part of this class called Anam, and some of you know it. Yeah, I had never heard of it, but this is the 25th anniversary edition. It's a book of Celtic wisdom, and he talks about the importance of this self-love. He talks about it's a great consolation to know that there is a wellspring of love within yourself. If you trust that this wellspring is there, you will then be able to invite it to awaken. And he says, you do not have to go outside yourself to know what love is. This is not selfishness, and it's not narcissism. They are negative obsessions with the need to be loved. Rather, this is the wellspring of love within the heart. And the Buddha talks about that. You know, we have the traditional heart practices where we recite phrases and we think of the categories of people, you know, myself, a loved one, a familiar stranger, a person who's difficult. But that's not in the suttas. What's actually in the suttas is this heart full of compassion and kindness and joy and equanimity is an outgrowth of the insight practice. When we recognize the hindrances, when we recognize we're trapped in craving, we recognize we're trapped in aversion, worry, dullness, doubt, and we can let go of those, whatever the individual pieces of it are. Oh, I want that person to like me so bad it hurts. And it's like, oh, if I can let go of that craving, there's an ease that comes. There's a compassion that's there. There's a joy that arises. And I know it works because I'm happy for my Dodger friends. Even though my team lost the World Series, their team won, and they're so happy, and I can be happy for them. That wouldn't have been true 25 years ago at all. And I'm like, wow, this stuff works. There's a softening when we let go of those hindrances. And it's not necessarily the mentioning of Trump. We hold people accountable, but we don't harden our hearts because it doesn't impact them at all. It impacts me. It impacts me. This is the practice of Buddhism and the teachings of Buddha is there's accountability for actions. It's called karma. And it's also called, we take accountability and responsibility, and there are consequences. But how do I walk through the world? What's running my, engine? And the invitation to kindness, to compassion. That's what in the wise intention in the Eightfold Path. The intention is to greet the world with kindness. Let go of what causes suffering and greet the world with friendliness and compassion. It's graduate level sometimes. I remember reading John Lewis's memoir, Walking with the Wind. John Lewis, the congressman from Georgia, he died a few years ago, but he was very active. He was the president of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee during the Civil Rights era. And he talked about, being in those marches where these people were coming at him with baseball bats. And the practice, because they'd studied nonviolence way before they sat down at a lunch counter. And the practice of nonviolence is to see the humanity in the other person. And he was working to try and find compassion for what was driving this person to do what they were doing. That is really challenging. I'm not saying it's like, come on, folks, what's keeping you? It's practice, and it's something I want to be that person. How can I open my heart enough to not push anybody out of it? There's another book I've mentioned a whole bunch lately called, I can't remember the name of it, but it's something like No One a Stranger by Valerie Kaur, Kaur. And she's a Sikh, Sikh. And that's part of their, you are not a stranger, you're a part of me, I just don't know yet. And it's that teaching of interconnectedness. We're all interconnected. And so to resource ourselves enough that we can be grounded and open our hearts to all beings. I teach living with an undefended heart. And this is all part of being with an undefended heart. It doesn't mean we don't take care of ourselves. It doesn't mean we don't have boundaries. That's not what this means. It doesn't mean what Pema Chodron calls idiot compassion. To be compassionate, so do whatever you have to do. It's not what that means. It's compassion, it's love, and you can't cause harm. And you don't get to do that. It's really challenging. So find your resources. Find how to take care of yourselves. Do something. Make plans to take care of yourselves. Go out and buy some chocolate almond croissants or something, if that's your thing. Go for it. Or go for a walk with a friend. But really, how do you take care of yourselves in these moments? And not just this moment, but, Duke is not going to end. Duke is always going to be here. It's just going to look different. So thank you again, my friends, for your kind attention. And we have a few minutes left if there are any questions or comments. Yeah. With that, I thank you, my friends, for being here and remembering that we don't just practice for our own benefit, but we practice for the benefit of all beings. May all beings be free. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody. Good to see you.